thank you for being with us today. I really appreciate your presence. Our mission today is going to be to identify the industry best defense mechanisms against account takeovers. So we have a lot to cover today in the next about 30 minutes. Then we'll have about 15 minutes for your questions. If you have any, please feel free to put them on the right side. There's a chat box and only the admins can see your messages. So feel free to share your questions as I'm talking, and once we're done, I can review them. So today we're going to have a presentation that will be divided into 4 sections. The first one will be acquisition. So how do malicious actors get the leaked credentials and how do they collect them? We will then review how they assess their value and how they monetize these leaked credentials. And finally, we'll be presenting a few solutions that you can implement into your organization today. So the goal is really to go over all of the attack chain of malicious actors and to really understand the problem of leaked credentials. So you will also find a copy of the slides on the handout section to your right. So if you want to have a souvenir of this webinar, please feel free to download them. But please be careful, do not post them online or share them publicly. It's really for your own benefit. So many of you may not know who Flare is and who I am. So Flare Systems is a cyber threat intelligence startup that is based in Montreal that was launched in 2017. As for myself, I'm one of the co-founder and I'm the chief research officer for the company. My background is a PhD in criminology, and I have 10 plus years of experience logging into the various dark web and illicit platforms online, and publishing in various academic journals the results of my research. So I've published edited books as well as in many fine journals such as the British Medical Journal. I've also developed open source and free software. So many of you may know the BitCluster software tool that allows you to track Bitcoin flows that is used pretty much worldwide by law enforcement, academics, and security professionals. And we have upcoming research coming on how to use this tool to really better track money launderers and how financial fraudsters send and receive their payments. So we'll be back with that for another webinar. And more generally, I've been involved in many of the interesting events on the dark web of the past few years, including the trial of the first dark web illicit markets. So apparently the administrator of that platform did not appreciate the monitoring that I was doing on his illicit market and was talking with his partners about ways to intimidate me, or even worse, it wasn't really clear. And that was known as the Canadian Professor Incident. And that really taught me how to better investigate illicit activities online, how to be more discreet, and that, it's an important lesson that malicious actors are also doing their own counterintelligence on us. So really the webinar today will draw from all these experiences. So let's get started. Now, the first point that I want to touch on today is how do malicious actors acquire credentials? Well, there's 5 methods that they commonly use to do this, and we'll cover them one by one. So the first one is using or attacking, I should say, popular image editing software. Here you have in this chart the number of vulnerabilities that were published for only one of these software, which is called ImageMagick. And it's pretty interesting to see that pretty much every single month, if you had this software installed on your website, you would need to update your software and make sure that you were patched. Otherwise, malicious actors could get in. It was also interesting to see that in December and January, apparently there were no vulnerabilities reported. So apparently the hackers took off for the holidays, just like your security team did, apparently because there wasn't anything to patch at that time. But the point is that on a regular basis, there will be vulnerabilities in the software that you may be using when you're bringing all these components together. And that will lead to takeover by malicious actors because they'll be using these vulnerabilities. And over here, what you see is an example of an OpenCard admin panel. So this panel for OpenCard allows you to see the total sales for the company, how much sales they made over the last year. You can see the number of orders. And at the bottom, you have a list of all of the name of the clients as well as their information. So we censored some of that information in this slide. But the point is that malicious actors who will take over this OpenCard admin panel will either resell access to the panel or the information that was there. And in this case, we're talking about a business that was sold almost $1 million in sale. and about $263,000 over the past year. The second thing that we commonly see is SQL injection. So it's basically bypassing the login form authentication by tricking it into doing something that they're not supposed to. So in the example that you see over here, what the malicious actor is doing is that he's using these apostrophes and these special characters to force the login agent to ask its database if, well, basically 1 equals 1. And because that is true, well, then that means that the login agent will gladly log you in. And that means that the malicious actor can take over the system. And you may think that this really simple trick does not work anymore, but it was used successfully just last April to breach the firewalls of Sophos, which is a major security vendor. So it is still today an important and a significant problem for security and something to really be aware of. The third measure or the third method that malicious actors will use is, well, phishing attacks. So malicious actors will use spam or redirects from hacked websites to draw victims to their fake portals, such as the one that you're seeing over here at this point. And if you're paying close attention, it's really interesting to see the level of details that the malicious actors have invested into these fake portals. So they will fake everything in the UI. So you will see, for example, the error messages will appear. You will see the username will appear as well. And you will have the little blue dots that we're all familiar with at the top of the screen as well. And once the victims enter the information, well, they're stored usually in a text file somewhere on the server that the malicious actor can retrieve after this, as you can see over here. So even though it looks real, this is basically just a software that's stealing credentials from a website. The fourth method that the malicious actors commonly use is, well, hiring hackers to attack websites. And here what you see is a posting that was made on an online dark web forum where a malicious actor is asking for hackers who would be able to dump databases from websites. And these hackers for hire are readily available, and they will often work in association with malicious actors who know how to monetize the stolen data. And in this case, the malicious actor promises to keep the data private, so he would probably be taking the information, logging in himself to try and steal the funds that would be in the bank accounts or the access to the rights that are linked to that account. And of course, as you see at the bottom, it says payment in BTC, which means that all the payments are made in Bitcoin, which is an anonymous cryptocurrency. Finally, the fifth and last method that the hackers use is taking advantage of all the data that is leaked or sold online. So in essence, what they're doing is they're taking advantage of other people's work. And every week you will find a new breach that is announced. Often it will have millions, if not hundreds of millions of stolen information leaked. And so this information is usually sold at first and then leaked for free online. So all of these leaks at some point were offered on various dark web forums, and people could buy them, one record at a time, maybe 1,000 records at a time. But over time, as people have bought these accounts, they get leaked online and they can get reused for attackers who want to try and to abuse the leaked credentials. Over here, you see some of the biggest leaks of the past few years, with Heartland and Equifax topping the line at over 100 million accounts. But as you can see, there are many other institutions that were attacked over the past few years, and many of them have leaked millions of accounts. And kind of the main takeaway from this presentation, from this section of presentation, is that really all companies that collect financial or personal information of customers are at risk. Offenders are mostly going to be opportunistic in nature, and they've proven that they will be going after pretty much everyone who has any personal or financial information. And this can be, of course, e-commerce, but it can also be government agencies. It can even be power companies. So it can be pretty much any company that has this information. And given the latest regulations on the protection of personal and financial information, I think it's really important to understand just that malicious actors are likely to target you if you have this information and you don't protect against some of these methods that I just presented. Now, over the years, one of the things that I've really wondered and asked myself is, so how do malicious actors assess the value of these credentials? So having access to a lead credential in and of itself is interesting and valuable for malicious actors. But if these credentials could be linked to multiple accounts or to multiple websites, that means that the malicious actor could take advantage of all these websites, and that would really improve the value or increase the value of the lead credential. And this really drives the profits for malicious actors and enables them to find even more outcome for the lead credentials that they have. And we have to be really careful about the potential of lead credentials, just because leaks from one side can lead to account takeover on multiple other sites. And here we found some data that were published in earlier this year in the LastPass password survey. So for those who don't know, LastPass is a password management, and it shows the way that people use their password. And it's really interesting to see, for example, that in all cases, about half of people use the same or similar password on multiple websites, despite knowing that this could increase their personal security risk. So even though people know they shouldn't, they still reuse the same password across multiple websites. We see that about half of people haven't changed their password in the last 12 months, even after hearing about a breach, which means that even if you know that your account, that the website that you have an account on was breached, you're probably not going to go there, log in, and change your password. And finally, even though most people think that their accounts aren't vulnerable enough to be worth a hacker's time, the point of this presentation is really to show, well, maybe that's the case, that this particular account is not all that interesting, but if it opens up other potential account takeovers, then it can be a problem. So what do malicious actors do to assess the value of the leaked credentials? Well, basically, they're going to be doing what we call credential stuffing. And so in this case, the consumers who use the same username and passwords across multiple websites will be vulnerable, because malicious actors will try these combinations on multiple websites to see if they actually give them access to other resources. So if you're using, for example, the username admin and the password on one website, the malicious actors will try that on multiple other websites and see if they work somewhere else, and then take over that account. Now, this process used to be something that was manual, so it was really time consuming for malicious actors, just because they had to try every single combination on every single website, and that was something that took quite some time. Now, more recently, what we've seen is that malicious actors actually managed to automate much of this work, and this is what we're demonstrating right now. So this is in demo an open bullet account takeover experience. So what is going on your screen is basically someone using this open bullet software that allows people to do credential stuffings. So what the person here is doing is they're storing into the program a list of username and passwords. So this list could be bought online, could be downloaded online, maybe they hacked a database somewhere, but you input all this list. As you see on the left, you have all the emails and the password next to them, and this is fed into the software. The second thing that you feed into the software is a config file, so a configuration file that tells the software, this is the website that I want to try these credentials against, and this is how you will know if you've succeeded into logging in. And there are a lot of options and configurations that you have. You will be able to use proxies. You can determine how many robots that you're going to use to attack a single website at a time. And basically what you're going to see in the statistics on the right, and I'll be showing another chart after this with the results, is basically how it worked and how much you succeeded into getting these accounts. So if we move on, to the summary of how this software works, well, it's basically what you see on the right, bottom right over here, where this person attacked the Gucci.com website, and they found actually 15 credentials, so 15 username and password that worked. And just to the top right of this of the little square, what you see is that they achieved this result in only 26 minutes. So if you take these collections of username and passwords from online, you put them into Open Bullet, you load up the software, it can very quickly identify which username and password is worth using on what service. And when you look at the value of these credentials, what you see is that in many cases, the value of some credentials will not be so high. So for certain industries, for example, the entertainment industry, if you have the Netflix, the Spotify of this world, what you see is that the value of these credentials is not going to be very high, so only $8, for example. But when you can use these credentials to log into a loyalty program, e-commerce program, or other types of accounts, then it becomes much more valuable, which means that even if you manage to steal a login from an entertainment website, it doesn't mean you're only going to make $8. It means that if you can flip it across other accounts, you can multiply the revenues that you're going to make, and this can become actually pretty profitable for the malicious actors. And so once these malicious actors have collected these credentials, once they've assessed their value, well, how do they monetize these credentials? It really depends on the type of malicious actor we're talking about. You will have the independent malicious actor. And in this case, it's someone who will be working mostly alone. They can use the hacking tools that are published or bought online. They can take advantage of the data breaches that are published online or that they've bought. And this will allow them to do some credential theft. This will allow them to get into the systems and then to abuse them. So one scenario we could see over here that we've seen about 1 million times is someone getting into the apple.com website, for example, ordering a laptop, receiving it at their home, and then reselling it on eBay or another service. So basically someone who's able to do all these frauds just by themselves, just using the tools and the information that is available online. Now it's important to remember that, there's 365 days in a year, 24 hours in a day, 60 minutes in an hour, and 60 seconds in a minute. So if a malicious actor was able to launch an attack every 30 minutes for a whole year, he would still only victimize 17,520 accounts. So this means that when we look at malicious actors who steal hundreds of millions of credentials, as we've seen in one attack against a large hotel chain over the past few years, it means that there's just no way for any one group of malicious actors or any one malicious actor to manage all these credentials, and they need to work in networks, basically. And so their behavior and what happens really looks something like this. So you will have some malicious actors who will be coding some malware, and this malware will be purchased by another malicious actor number 2, for example. And this person is going to be responsible for using it to steal the credentials and then reselling those credentials to someone else, malicious actor number 3, who will be abusing the commercial service or the product, stealing the funds, ordering the laptops, and reselling it on eBay. And of course, we could continue this chain with money launderers, with cryptocurrency exchanges as well. But you see how all of this criminality and all this criminal underground is really built on networks. And these networks very often will be hosted on the dark web, and even more especially on crypto markets. That's the term that we use to label online illicit markets. And here you have just a small image of how these markets work. So pretty much it works like any Amazon or eBay web store, which means that every vendor will have their own page. Every product will have its own page. And there you will have an image, a description, you will have a price, you will even see how many sales were made. And this is all driven and all used to drive sales. So to show to people, look, 1,500 people have bought credentials from me. Maybe you should do that at the same time. And on the right, you see that the price is presented in USD, but it can also be presented in Bitcoin, as you see over here, the BTC. And more, we're also seeing Monero, which is another cryptocurrency, which is even more anonymous, basically. Another thing that we often see is discussion forums. So these may look straight from the 1990s, but they're still very much being used by malicious actors. You see on the right the number of views that each of these threads have had. And it's pretty impressive to have just, one of these forums have thousands, if not tens of thousands of people who are viewing them. And so it doesn't mean that all of these views are by malicious actors who have downloaded all of this, software to attack your systems. It just means that, a lot of people are going to be interested into these software, and that malicious actors, because these tools don't require any programming skills or any particular skills, are going to be used by many people to launch attacks. Finally, something that we don't often talk about is chat rooms. So more and more we're hearing about Telegram, but actually when you're talking about financial fraud, account takeovers, much of the activities going on is on ICQ. So some of the activity on ICQ is mirrored on Telegram, but what we found is a lot of really interesting information on ICQ at least. So for those who were using ICQ in the 1990s, like I was, to look and to communicate with their friends, well, it's basically the same software, but now you have chat rooms. People can send private or public messages. You have traces of all the images that were shared within a group. And this really provides you with advertisements, as you can see on the top over here. So someone who's willing to do money transfers internationally and anonymously, but also looking for partners. So we'll have many messages of people trying to recruit new partners to conduct the account takeovers and leaking credentials, basically. So far what we've looked at is the concept of leak credentials. Where do they come from? How do malicious actors assess their value, and how they're being traded in networks online, on the dark web, in chat rooms, or in discussion forums on the dark web as well. That doesn't mean that there's nothing that can be done against this. And actually, there's some solutions that are relatively easy to implement for you, and that can really help you prevent this type of account takeovers. So I'm going to be talking about these solutions, and I'm going to be starting with perhaps the easiest one, or the one that will likely create the least friction into your organization, and moving on to something that's a bit more complex. So the first one is a service that we offer here at Flare Systems, that many people offer, is actually a service to prevent password reuse. And it's pretty simple to understand. What happens with this service is that your customer or your employees will visit your login portal, and they will enter their username and password as they always do. Now, once that happens, in the background, the server will send the username and the encrypted password to a trusted third-party solution. And this third party will compare the encrypted password to another password, to all the passwords that were leaked in the past and that they've collected through various means. And the goal is for this solution to return to your server either an indication that the password and the username were used somewhere else, or that they're clean as far as they know. And so in one case, your user will know nothing about this process and will just go on into your web portal. And in the second scenario, the user or the customer or the employee will be redirected to an authentication panel where they're going to be asked more questions. They're going to maybe be asked to phone in to confirm their identity, but you can actually take action. And so when we see all of these leaked credentials online, whether they're being sold or they're being offered freely, if you have many of these passwords to compare your users against, this really helps you prevent this password reuse and to limit the number of victimizations you're going to have on your system. What we're trying to see more and more is this notion of passwordless authentication. Many companies will offer this service. I'm taking over here, I gave you the example of Auth0. And basically what happens is your users will enter their email address, and instead of logging into the web portal, they'll have to wait to get either an email or an SMS with a link. And once they click on that link, they will be able to log into your systems. So basically with this option, you don't store any passwords. Your users do not have to remember their password. You don't have to protect those passwords to encrypt them. It's basically just a way of using out-of-band methods to confirm the identity of your users. And of course, if the malicious actors control your users' email as well, then it becomes a problem, but at least it solves the problem of these leaked credentials online. And while there are many commercial options being offered, I would invite you to look at Squirrel. So it's the secure, quick, reliable login option. And it's a really interesting, completely free open source solution with implementations on many platforms. And it's really a great tool to help you set up this passwordless authentication on your systems. The third option that you have is something that we're getting more and more familiar with as well, is the multi-factor authentication, which means that your user will enter their username and their password once again, but they will have to open up an app, for example, from Google, who generates a new number every 30 seconds or every minute. And so even if the malicious actors control the email addresses and the password, unless they control this application, then it becomes impossible for them to log in. And this really breaks many of the credential stuffings and the password reuse. So even if your users are reusing the same password as they were before, because they have this multi-factor authentication about something they know and something they have, it really helps protect their account. And finally, perhaps the fourth option is looking more at behavior analysis. So everyone, when we connect online, even though we don't realize it, we will have patterns. So when I log into my bank, I send money for my mortgage and I log out, and I do that once a month. And so if I was to do that twice, thrice a month, that may be suspicious, and that's something that we could flag. So very often organizations, and maybe on the larger end, will already be looking at the IP addresses, the geolocalization, the web browser, the time of day that people log in, the length of the session, and the type of activity that people have to try and flag some suspicious activities. And malicious actors, I didn't put a screenshot in here, unfortunately, but when you're buying these leaked credentials, very often the malicious actors will also tell you, well, the person you will be impersonating has this IP address, is located at that place, is using that web browser. And so you will have some of that information when you're buying these leaked credentials, because that will allow you to bypass this behavior analysis. Now, if we compare all of these solutions together, it becomes clear that there are some options that are easier to implement and others that create more friction. So if we're looking, for example, at preventing the password reuse, it's completely transparent for your users. So no one will actually know that you're using this service, but then you become dependent on a third-party company that has to provide you with a good service, a good list of stolen credentials to compare your passwords with, and to make sure that you are actually detecting as many password reuse as possible. When we're looking at passwordless authentication, it's really interesting because, as in with multi-factor authentication, actually the leaked credentials do not lead to compromission of account necessarily. One of the problems that we have, unfortunately, is that with the password-led authentication, the delivery of the email or the SMS is not very often in real time, and you have no quality of service. So basically, in this case, what you realize if you've ever run one of these systems is that many users are not familiar or aware with how these systems are set up. They don't expect to receive an email. They try to click on the one-time link multiple times. And so it's not something that people are used with and very familiar with. As far as multi-factor authentication is concerned, well, in this case, you have users who have to install and maintain an application on their phone. And this can become very problematic with certain populations, or even with people who lose their phone, who don't have access to their phone at some point. And so you really have to help your users maintain this application. And so in this case, once again, you need to be doing some training to help people make sure they can use your systems. And finally, when we're talking about behavior analysis and profiling your users, it's extremely difficult for malicious actors to mimic the behavior of a real user because, well, in essence, they'll be doing something that the users are not used to doing. But at the same time, there is a great deal of development costs that are going to be significant, long, and especially validating all the behavior analysis can really become a big problem for corporations. It is, however, one of the most difficult things to mimic and to bypass as a malicious actor. I really want to thank everyone for showing up today. I hope this was valuable and interesting for you. Webinar for today. The goal was, again, really to demonstrate how malicious actors are using these leaked credentials and how they're doing account takeover. And what we wanted to demonstrate with this webinar is that malicious actors have really created a science of account takeover, and they've developed extremely well-oiled software that will be able to automate the process of testing all of the username and passwords that leak online. And as we demonstrated with the videos, you can see that they can test thousands, if not more, accounts per second. And this really enables them to take over accounts on a scale that was rarely seen before. Now, it doesn't mean that this is a hopeless fight against malicious actors. Quite the contrary. The goal was to show that there are many solutions that can be implemented. Some of them require more investment, some of them require more training, and others are easier to implement. But in all cases, I do believe that it's possible to combat this account takeover using the solutions that we have today and not some far-fetched technology that may be invented at some point in time. So I hope this was enjoyable. And if you need to learn more about our services, well, just send us an email at hello@flare.systems. So this was David Itsu, and thank you for listening and have a good day. Bye-bye.